Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. In this episode, I'm joined by Rick Belden. Rick's been exploring and chronicling the psychology and inner lives of men for more than 35 years and helping men who feel stuck in life get things moving again. He's also a poet, an author, and an artist. So welcome, Rick.
Thanks, Philip. I'm very happy to be here.
Perhaps we could start off by talking about your own experiences of mental health challenges, perhaps that you experienced in your midlife.
Sure. How can I best approach this? I guess the kind of the quickest entry point is to say that as a result of things that occurred in my childhood, things that went on in the family system, I came into the adult world not having a very good idea of who I was. My main priority was to get out of the situation that I'd grown up in, get as far away from it as I could, make some money, and get out on my own and survive. And so my choices were basically driven by those factors. So when I graduated from high school, I graduated very high in my class. I had offers for scholarships and all kinds of things at colleges. I paid no attention to them because I felt like I need to make money as soon as I can. So I got a job in a sawmill, and I worked there for a year and a half outside in the winter when it was 10 below, 10 hours a day. And kind of on the subject of masculinity, one of my sort of other ideas or intentions for that was I wanted to prove to the older men in my family that I could do a hard, dangerous job too, because they were all blue collar guys, and I never felt like they really accepted me as somebody who wasn't as tough as them. It didn't actually change their opinions of me, but that's part of what I had in mind. I wanted to prove that I could do a hard job, I could do a dangerous job, I could be a man. And after a year and a half of that, I wound up moving to Houston. I grew up in the Northeast United States. I'm 2,000 miles into Texas. Kicked around some more. Finally realized it's like I really need a college education. These minimum wage jobs are not going to cut it, and I can do better than that. And I had worked for a tech company in the warehouse and had some interactions with some of the programmers for inventory stuff. And I thought, well, I can do what they do. So I got a degree in computer science. I didn't like it. I didn't really want to do it. I almost changed my major every semester, literally, because I didn't want to do it. But I felt, again, driven by those factors of like practicality. I've got to be able to make a living. I'm putting myself through college. When I finish, I've got to be able to make some money, off this degree. And so I went into a profession and a field of endeavor and a lifestyle, really, that was not aligned with my priorities, what was meaningful to me. And then I had a very hard time finding my way out of it. So by the time I was in my late 40s, I had gotten into the pattern of taking a lot of time off. I'd do contract work, I'd save money, I'd do writing, which is what I always wanted to do, and also self-discovery work, self-healing work, self-development work. I'd use up all my money, and when I ran out, I'd get another IT job and go back to being miserable. And one of the things that started to change it was I had a ruptured appendix when I was 47, and I almost died. And it happened at the same time that I hadn't worked in about 10 months. So I wound up going into a bankruptcy because of the medical bills. It took me a couple of months to recover from the ruptured appendix. And I had wound up with one of the worst jobs I've ever had. And I started to realize again that my time was limited. I did a lot of values clarification in the following year or two. I got much more clear about what I would be unhappy with if my life ended and I hadn't attempted to really put myself into it and make the effort and try. And then as I turned 50, my vision started to clear up. I started to get a lot more understanding of what my absolute necessities were in terms of what do I do with this life. And after that, it didn't happen all at once, but I started to it required another health disaster for me to get all the way out of IT. And that happened in 2016. And then I started my coaching service like a year later.
So just to rewind a little bit, and if I may, can I ask, about going back to your childhood, because a lot of adult behaviors stem from what you experienced in your childhood. So I wonder if you could elaborate, if you don't mind, a bit on that. And then also you talked about the fact that you worked in a sawmill to kind of prove yourself to some of the members of your family. But what then drove you to kind of spend the next 30 years still doing a job you didn't really want to do?
Well, I'm going to start with the last part first. It again goes back to, in part, to not understanding myself, not understanding who I was, and a lack of confidence in myself. I didn't feel, even when I first started coaching, I still had feelings of like, maybe I'm just a big imposter. And so much of that goes back to my childhood environment. Very volatile father, very angry, very volatile, very dangerous. Um, and So that basically drove me into a defensive posture, not only with the outside, but with myself, because I knew that there were certain things that I couldn't show him. There were certain behaviors that he disapproved of. One of which was just being happy. Uh, so I really closed down a lot. And I was a highly creative child, and um, but at the time, this was like late '60s, early '70s, and there was a big emphasis in the United States on being a scientist, being an engineer, that kind of stuff because of the space program and other things. And the school didn't really know what to do with me either. Um, so I was pushed because I was good at math and I was good at science. So I was pushed in that direction. So I had sort of a lack of direction internally, and I sort of had a lack of understanding direction from the outside as well. Um, and so I was just basically a psychological wreck by the time I got out of high school. I couldn't even go into a restaurant and eat with other people because I'd have such terrible panic attacks because of the way my father treated me at the table at home and in restaurants. And so there was just sort of a domino effect of um, basically what people refer to now as complex PTSD or complex trauma that I experienced as a child. We didn't have names for that then. I had anxiety attacks all the time. I didn't know what to call them or who to talk to about it. So I developed just a whole lot of compensatory strategies, a lot of which had to do with sort of like compartmentalizing and cutting parts of myself away that didn't seem to have any value or actually put me in danger, either at home with my father, at school with the other kids. And then that sort of survival thing took over, and I stayed in survival mode for several decades because I was not in touch with all my capabilities.
So it was really coping mechanism, and you didn't have the ability to look outside of that for many years then. How about your your artistic, the wanting to write? Did that kind of seep out anyway? If that was core to who you are, did that show itself, or did you completely keep it all repressed?
It's a really good question. That's one of the reasons that I chose to become a software developer and a programmer, because I felt like, I'm writing. I'm still writing. At least I'm doing some writing. And that's kind of how I don't know if rationalize is the right word, but I also started journaling. I started doing a lot of journaling. I like spiral bound notebooks. I've got boxes of those things in my closet. Uh, and I've realized in recent years that one of the reasons I journal so much is because it enabled me to remember who I was, uh, and it helped me to not forget who I was, because I had to put so much of what I knew and who I was and what I valued aside growing up, and then in corporate environments, that I had to, in order to retain that connection to myself, I had to do a lot of journaling. Uh, as well as it helping me understand myself better, I had tons of dreams, and I was really fascinated with those, and so I started doing a lot of dream journaling, and that led into writing poetry, and that led into writing 3 poetry books, all while I was in that corporate lifestyle when I was on breaks and so forth. So it was, it was strong enough in me, that creative energy and that creative impulse was strong enough in me that it had to find ways out. And when I didn't uh, create those pathways, I'd get super dysfunctional. That's when I'd drink a lot of alcohol. I'd go to strip clubs. I'd just smoke pot because I was so miserable if there wasn't at least some outlet. But at the same time, when I would let it out, the mornings would be terrible because I'd get up in the morning and I'd be journaling and just like, you got to go to work, you got to go to work, you got to go to work. I'd be so angry on the way to work because I felt like I was shutting all that energy down. So that was the best I could do, to keep myself alive, because it wasn't just about keeping the creative energy alive. It's about keeping myself alive.
Once you'd escaped from your home environment and, you become an adult, and I appreciate you're an adult just trying to cope and survive. How did you then view your home life, and especially your father or your parents? I mean, how did you cope with that as an adult?
Well, the first thing I did was get away as far as I could, uh, which was necessary. That was a necessary first step. But I think, I, like a lot of people, think, well, I'm physically removed from it now, so therefore it's gone. But of course, we internalize our experience as children, and so, I moved away 2,000 miles, but I still had that internal experience of being in that family system with me that still influenced my behavior and my beliefs and my perceptions and my decisions and my relationships. And so when I got into my late 20s, I started to understand that I needed to do something about this. And that's when I first encountered a man named John Lee here in Austin, who was doing men's groups out of his little house at the time. Uh, and that was my first individual counseling, and also my first experience in a group with other men. Uh, and as I started to peel that back, the sort of negative influence of my experience with my father really started to become clear to me. A tremendous amount of anger at that guy, because I'd had to repress every molecule of anger that I had growing up, because it would be super dangerous if I didn't. Um, and so I was a real angry guy, and I didn't know it. I thought I was just a nice guy who, was easy to get along with, which I am. But there was also a reservoir of like rage from the way that I'd been treated, and so I spent several years working through that. And my first poetry book is largely about that. Um, but there also came a point later on, probably in my 40s, I started to realize it's like, well, I've done all this work on my father wound, my father issues, but things are still not going well in my life. I wonder what else there might be. And I had a counselor a little bit later on. I was working on some dreams with her, and she kept sort of persistently but gently pointing out, well, what do you think about your mother's behavior in this dream? And I'd be like, why look at what my dad is doing, you know? And over time, I began to realize that I had been damaged by my mother as well, in a different sort of way. And so then I had to do some really deep work with that, and that was even way more difficult than the work I did around my experience with my father.
And so you talk about these concepts of the father wound and the mother wound. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So basically, the idea in each case is that there is some sort of disconnection or some sort of disruption in the relationship between the parent and the child. And it happens at a real deep level. It happens in a real persistent and or consistent way. So, in some cases it might be, well, someone's father died, when he was 3 years old, or the parents got divorced when he was 9, and he went with his father, and he never got to see his mother again. Um, or it could be sometimes people are adopted. There are all sorts of things that happen to create that sort of separation and disrupt the natural bonding and the natural development between the child and the parent. Um, but there are also, it's probably, at least equally common. There are cases like mine where, my father was just, he was emotionally unavailable, is the best way I can think of to put it, at best, and he was hostile and dangerous at worst. So I could not form a healthy relationship with him. There was no way for me to do that. I still needed a father. I still wanted a father. Um, and so I just sort of tried to um, reformat myself in all the ways I could think of, where maybe I would feel he approved of me and he was interested and he wanted me. Um, so that's the sort of overt version of a parental wound. That's a father wound in my case. The sort of covert wounding, which is the mother wound in my case, is once again there's a disruption there in that relationship. There's a disconnection. Um, there's a lack of, sometimes with mothers, and it could be with fathers too, but sometimes it's over engagement. So you have the mother who's like this, who just basically won't let the boy be a boy. She's overprotective. She's over mothering. She's smothering. And then you can have the other version, which is under engagement, where maybe the mother's really narcissistic and she's like, her whole priority is just herself. And she sees the son as a source of attention, affirmation, validation, a proxy who can operate out in the world as like, her little representative, so that everything that he does reflects back on her. And so that boy doesn't get to be an individual. He doesn't get to be a separate person. Uh, and so that was a lot of the separation for me from my father. That father who worked for me was like, it was obvious. It's like, I have to separate from this guy. There was still a lot of grief and there's still a lot of resistance because every child has things they want and they don't want to let them go, no matter how old you are. If there's a child inside you that wanted to have a good father, he doesn't just disappear. Whereas for my mother, I had to really ease up to the idea that maybe she wasn't the good one. Maybe she wasn't the one who kept me safe. Maybe she was the one who actually kept having kids with somebody who was not safe to be around, and that actually put me in danger. So that's a that's the thumbnail version as best I can come up with it right now.
So when you're in that situation, you're a child, and you're experiencing this kind of trauma from a parent or both parents. It must stunt your development because you must go through a natural development cycle as a child through teenage to adult. But if you're not able to properly emerge or experience that journey, presumably that then, and perhaps as you've already explained, that really catches up with you then in adulthood and must leave gaps in who you are and how you should feel.
That's very well said. And that's something, because I've been in this arena for so long, as a participant, uh, people used to talk all the time about healing, 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 healing. And that's important. But the thing I realized at some point was the thing you just said, which is there are developmental phases and gateways that you need to go through as a child on your way to adulthood, and you don't get to do it because someone's blocking it, or there's no support, there's no one to show you, and so a lot of what I've done with myself, I've learned to do. A lot of what I do with clients as a coach is help them to identify, where did your development stop? And how do you know that based on what's going on in your life right now? And, how can we start to move you into that direction and kind of set you up, so that you can complete that part of your development on your own? I had to surrender, very important parts of myself. And surrender, I don't know, maybe that's little bit overstated, but surrender in the sense that I didn't show them to anybody anymore. And so I just sort of tucked them away or hid them away. It got worse when I was think it's probably 13, 14, 15, which is a really, really pivotal time for a lot of uh, people, men and women, in their development. That threshold that you have to cross from childhood to adulthood is treacherous. Uh, and that's when a lot of us who are in these kind of complex trauma environments, we make a lot of decisions about ourselves, about how to do relationships, about what life means, about how to be in the world with very limited information. Our brains aren't fully developed and we're under duress. Uh, and so at that point, because I was very open, I was very sensitive, I was very artistic and very trusting. Even after the environment I was living in, around school kids, I was like, oh, everybody's cool and everybody's nice and all that stuff. And I got bullied so badly for being a good student and for my appearance and some of my hobbies that I just cut that part of myself off. And I just decided I'm not going to be that guy anymore. I'm going to be, I'm going to adopt this persona because this still kind of feels like me. Uh, but this will now enable me to protect myself and keep myself safe at this age. And so I cut off all kinds of parts of myself. I cut off the artist part of myself because that was considered to be too weird. Um, so yeah, there's all kinds of different aspects of like, you can basically not have the help you need to cross a developmental threshold. You can be blocked from crossing it because some mothers don't want their sons to grow up. And so they will stand in the way. Um, and then you might make a survival strategy based decision yourself to go, I'm not going to go down this path any farther because I get rejected, I get shamed, I get bullied, I get made fun of, I feel ostracized, it makes me feel weird, or whatever.
And then you wake up, you're 40 and you're lost in your own life because you're not who you are. And you took a fork in the road, but you probably took the wrong one. Or maybe it was the right one at the time.
It was the right one at the time, Philip. It's like, we don't, it takes a genius to survive this stuff. And all survivors are geniuses. They may have adopted a lot of maladaptive strategies and approaches and beliefs and so forth, but those were the right ones at the time because those were the best options that you knew about that were available to you.
Yeah, I guess you survived then. You continue to survive. So I know you work a lot with men now. What strategies do you recommend for men who are trying to heal these parental wounds? How do you work with people?
Well, my top priority, which I arrived at by accident for myself, nobody ever really told me this. Probably people do now. Uh, I thought so. As I said, I first went into getting some help with another man who was a little bit older, who had some experience and was offering himself to do that. Um, I felt like, what's wrong with my life? Well, I hate my job. I can't keep a girlfriend. I'm estranged from my family. All my friends are getting married, so there's nobody to party with anymore, and I'm just by myself and miserable all the time. If I could solve those problems, everything would be okay. And what I didn't realize was the number one problem is that I had a lousy relationship with myself. I treated myself badly. I was relentless with myself. I had a vicious inner critic, if you guys are familiar with that concept, the voice that tells you you're no good, you'll never get it, you're stupid, you're ugly, nobody likes you. Um, and so what I learned in the process of pursuing resolution of those other things was that the number one priority for me was my relationship with myself. And so that's the foundational thing that I work on with all the men and, women see me too, is like, let me help you get a better understanding of your relationship with yourself. Evaluate it, see where it stands right now, learn about how you treat yourself, and let's develop that so that you have a better experience with yourself. Because you can have everything on the outside, which is what I thought I needed. And if your relationship with yourself is abusive, basically, or neglectful, or hostile, or so just inaccurate, you don't see yourself clearly, you're still not going to be happy. You're not going to feel content. You're not going to feel safe or satisfied. You're still going to feel like something just isn't the way it's supposed to be.
And I guess, is that a surprise if you feel like that, if that's your experience, if that's, when you're a kid, you only know one experience and that's your own. So, if that's how you were brought up, to feel that you had no value, and basically to constantly criticize yourself, then no wonder that carries through into life. So people you work with and just people listening, do you have a kind of eureka moment where you suddenly think, actually, I'm just not happy and I can change this? Is it difficult to do that yourself, or do you really need help?
I think that's a highly individual sort of experience. I think I think a lot of people can be actually pretty desperately unhappy for a very long time and not realize it, or they'll talk themselves out of it, because they'll look at what's happening on the outside, and everybody will treat them like they've got everything they want, and they'll just kind of go along with it, because they don't necessarily have anything to measure it against. Um, but I think a lot of the time, it can start it started early for me. It started in my late 20s, as I said. Some people, excuse me, some people it gets to be, I think for a lot of people, it's when the kids leave the house, if they've raised kids, and the kids go off to college or the kids go off wherever. Um, and all of a sudden they realize it's like, well, I'm not really sure what my purpose is. Um, so, and some people can have, sometimes people have a health crisis, like I described, and that'll really crystallize some things for you. And you start to realize it's like, oh, I don't have that thing I said I'll do later. I don't have forever. That can do it too. Divorce is another one. Relationships ending. That's what got me in when I was 28. It's like I had another relationship just crash and burn, and it's just like I can't live like this.
So what signs, if you're looking for that within yourself, working with people, what are kind of common themes or obstacles, that you see with the people that you coach?
Number one thing I think is, the people that come to me, people either feel like they're stuck and they're not making any progress and they don't know what to do, and or they become aware that they're repeating the same pattern over and over again and getting the same bad result. And I think those are two sort of primary drivers that get people to come in my direction or go in the direction of somebody that they think can help them.
And just going back to your writing and your art, I've talked to quite a few men actually who've written books about their experiences, and they've found it incredibly cathartic, and it's really helped with their recovery. I guess not everybody can or wants to write a book, but did you feel it was a really important part of you going forward with a better life?
Absolutely, yes. Especially all three of them, but especially the very first one. That was the first time. Well, let me back up a little bit. So, as I said earlier, I was having a lot of dreams during that point in my life, and I felt like they were important. And I was having a very difficult time. I wanted to record them all, write them all down, but there were so many and there was so much detail. And I got this idea. I wrote a little poetry book when I was in high school. And then, like I said, I shut that part of myself down and forgot about it. And I got this idea. It's like, I wonder if I could write this dream down as a poem. That might be more efficient, and I could probably capture all the stuff that really matters. And so I started doing that. And I went to a little poetry workshop that was part of the men's group I was doing. And the next thing I knew, it just opened it right back up again, just like in high school. Um, and I, and the dreams were a lot of them were about the character of Iron Man, from the movies. Everybody knows who Iron Man is now. Back in 1989, that was a very esoteric thing that a lot of people didn't know about. But I loved Iron Man when I was a little boy. And then I'm in my late 20s, and suddenly I'm having a dream about Iron Man every night. I'm like, what's wrong with me? Going crazy? Um, and so with some help, I started to kind of explore that more fully. I started going to comic book stores and buying up the old comics I had when I was a boy. Uh, getting some toys, and then I started doing some art, and then I was writing all these poems, and it turned into that very first book. Um, and it absolutely saved me because I was so lost. I was functional. I was highly functional. If anybody looked at my life from the outside, it's just like, well, he's doing fine. But I was completely lost on the inside. And this was the first time I reconnected with one of my younger selves who was still in there, basically waiting for someone to pay attention to him because he had a lot to say. Uh, and he had things to tell me at age 30 that I needed to know that I had forgotten about myself. So for me, yes, that was life-saving.
So for you, it was kind of creative expression and tapping into something which was profound to you as a younger person. What about other guys who perhaps don't think of themselves as particularly creative? Is the key to either explore that further, or is it to tap into whatever you really enjoyed? What did you speak to that 12-year-old boy and ask them, what do they like doing? What do they want to do?
Yes, that's a fundamental part of what I do with everybody is let's identify one, maybe two younger selves that are like this close to just popping up to the surface, um, so that we can get them engaged. And so, you know, typically what I found is like there's usually like a 6 or 7 year old, and there's usually somewhere between 13 and 15. They're usually the two that are going to come up first. And so I have some, I have some processes that I use with people to help get access to that. One of those is I'll ask people to draw pictures. Uh, so, a man might tell me about a problem in his marriage, you know, and I'll say, draw a picture of what you feel like after your wife has been shaming you. And they'll go, I'm not an artist. I can't draw that. If I draw that, it'll look like a 6-year-old did it. And I'm like, that's exactly what we want. Uh, that's one of the reasons, Philip, why creativity and art, and you don't have to be good at it. Like the whole idea is not to see something that's technically wonderful. The idea is to see what kind of information comes out when you bypass your verbal filters and revert back to 6-year-old level skill. Um, and so that's a good way to start to connect. Another good way to start to connect is I'll always ask men, hey, do you have any photos of yourself when you were 6 or 7 years old, when you're 13 to 15? Let's look at those together. And then I'll ask some questions. How do you feel about that young guy? You know, do you feel like this is you? So a lot of guys, they'll look at the 6 or 7 year old and they'll go, yeah, that's me. They'll look at the 13 to 15-year-old. They're like, nope, I have no connection to that guy. Or I don't like him. He was a big wimp. He was a big nerd. You know, he's he didn't know how to act with girls. So there's a lot of shame for a lot of men around the 13 to 15-year-old period because we experience a lot of failure uh, during that time in our lives, many of us. And we didn't like those feelings then, and we don't want to feel those feelings now.
And what about I guess, the impact of this concept of masculinity, both culturally, environmentally, especially if you're a bit older, how does that impact on men's ability to kind of look back and explore their development in life? Because I guess a lot of men are just trying to repress any sort of vulnerability or perhaps terrified of appearing unmasculine.
Right. And again, not without reason. I mean, there's a reason why boys are pretty open and they turn into teenagers who are like bricks. Because, it could be in the family. So for example, in my case, like I said, both sides of my family, it was all factory workers, truck drivers, farmers, tough guys, right? So that's what was modeled for me. So whether that's who I am on the inside or whether that's how I express that part of myself or not, that was the standard that I was raised with. So as I said, what do I do first thing out of high school? I'm going to go get one of those dangerous, hard jobs and I'll show them.
The poetry didn't cut it. The
No, it
poetry.
didn't matter. I think for them, it was just like, yeah, you're just doing what we do. What's the big deal? You know? Um, but so, that's part of it. It's like we want as boys to feel like we're hitting the standard that's modeled for us by the men in our families and the men around us. Now, I'm older, so like I grew up in a time when I had extended family all around me. So, a lot of men in their 20s and 30s, they never had that. They lived in a different part of the country than their grandparents and their uncles. Um, so it kind of varies by generationally, but of course we're presented with all sorts of models in media and socially. And I think part of to kind of hopefully get to the core of your question, I think at some point every man has to decide, am I going to be bound by what I was told and all these external standards and all the shame that was put on me, is that going to define who I am as a man? Or do I want to define it myself? Which means you've got to push back against some of that stuff. And some of it you might, like, there's kind of a segment of the thought police, I guess, that are like, all traditional masculinity is bad. No man should pay attention to that. And that's just such a load, man. It's like that is a good way to live for some men, right? It doesn't mean that they're inherently brutal savages. It just means that there's a value system there and a philosophy that's practical and it fits them, it suits them. It doesn't have to suit every man, but I think I think we are required as men at a certain point in our lives to actually understand who we are and what our values are, where they came from, and do we want to just chuck some of that stuff because we found out it doesn't fit us? And if so, what are we going to put in its place?
So this is this kind of concept, I guess, of authentic masculinity, authentic to yourself. What steps can men take to kind of cultivate this authenticity for themselves in their daily lives?
I think that, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. How's your relationship with yourself, right? So if you're engaging in some sort of value-centered masculine behavior, we'll say, does that feel right for you? Do you feel resentful about it? Do you feel like an imposter? Or do you feel comfortable, like it fits you like a great pair of boots? You know, I think that it's really a certain amount of sort of introspection and self-assessment and measuring your life experience against what you were told it would be if you did this and this and this.
And how do you think the kind of cultural narrative, the narrative that's going on in society, how does that need to change perhaps in order for more men to feel comfortable in their authentic masculinity?
Well, I'll share my number one pet peeve, which is that for I don't know how long, 10, 15 years, maybe longer, there's been an enormous amount of cultural and media pressure on men to open up, to be vulnerable. Well, okay, fine. Where do they do that? Who do they do it with? And what's going to happen if they take that risk? Because what happens in a lot of cases is there isn't anybody in their life that can hold that space and accommodate it for them. Men who do that often get shut down. They get shamed. They get told to grow up. They get told, men run the world, so you should be quiet. Um, uh, or they just find that someone's just trying to give them solutions when all they really want to do is say, this is what's going on for me right now. I just need somebody to hear me. So I think it's not only useless, I think it's harmful to press men to open up and be vulnerable unless somebody is going to, unless we are collectively and individually going to put some sort of pragmatic effort in place to back it up. Because one of the things that will get men to shut down forever is if they've been shut down for 30 years and they finally take the risk and then someone tells them to man up or, like whatever, they might close up for the rest of their lives. It's like, that is a very fragile moment for a man. And so the support either has to be there. So either put up or shut up. Either like, let's all be supportive. Let's do it in a meaningful way that's tangible that men can rely on, or let's just stop telling men to do that.
So what do men do? I mean, you mentioned you went to a kind of men's group. People listening to this, what can they do to find the right person, the right space to talk about how they feel?
Well, it might take some looking. So, I mean, if you find somebody like me, I can help you with that. And I'm not the only one who can. Um, any men's groups can be excellent for that. They can also be hard to find. So I think, like, to try to make it a little bit more poignant, a little bit more practical, what I would say is, as a starting point, maybe write down what you want, right? Make a list of what you're looking for. In other words, if I'm going to be open, right, and I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to share intimate things, what do I need? Because if you don't do that, then you don't really know what you're walking into. You need to be able to assess the other side and go and even ask them questions. So, like, when I sometimes, people come to me for coaching, and coaching is really not the right answer. They really need to see a therapist or a counselor, and I'll work with them to go, like, what are you looking for? What are you expecting? You got to interview people to find out if they're going to be a good match for what you want. But you got to know what you want first, because some people, they might want to work with somebody where they say, I'm having this problem. The other person says, well, what you need to do is this and this and this and this. That might be what they want. But that's not necessarily what everybody wants.
So, we at the beginning, we were talking about helping men who feel stuck in their lives. So do you need to have an idea on how you want, what your life looks like unstuck? I mean, what if you've got no idea? What if you literally are stuck and you can't see the way forward?
It's pretty common, actually. Yeah, it's pretty common. So, what I do, when men come to me like that is, again, I go back to, like, let's help you understand yourself a little bit, right? And it's not necessarily a sort of a rational linear process. So, like, when I talked about writing my first book, that was anything but rational and linear, right? It was like some kind of magic uh, that happens when when a man unlocks a part of himself that he's become unaware of. um, then all sorts of things can come out of that. But you have to sort of start to understand, what have I locked down? What have I cut off for myself? And a lot of it, again, goes back to earlier ages. Like, what did you like to, so, like, Philip, okay, what did you like to do when you were 8 years old?
Well, that's a good question. I used to like reading. In fact, I wanted to have a bookshop when I was 8 years old.
Okay. Okay. And but you've kind of moved into that direction in some ways, right? Or not?
Well, I've just written a book, so
There it is, right?
fulfillment.
Yeah. And how old are you now?
I'm 55.
It can take a while, right? That's the other thing is, you really do need to be patient with yourself. But some men, when I ask that question, what did you like to do when you were 8 years old? They're like, I don't know. I don't remember. And so reconnecting with the things that were meaningful to you before you got into your teenage years is often a really good way to start to answer that question that you posed, which is basically, I'm stuck and I don't know what to do about it. And I don't even know what not being stuck would be like.
Well, Rick, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for all this advice. I think people listening would have found it really helpful as well. We'll put your web details in the description, but just if people want to find you, where do they go?
I'd recommend 3 places. One is my master website, which is rickbelden.com, and that has links to podcasts and books and writing and art and all my stuff. If you're interested in talking with me about coaching, that's rickbeldencoaching.com. And I do offer a free discovery session to have a conversation to find out if I'm a good match for what you're looking for, or to help you understand what you're looking for. And then I'm on YouTube. You can just look for Rick Belden on YouTube. There's a lot of videos out there.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing and spending time with us today.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Philip. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to find out more about Rick and his art and writing, visit his website, rickbelden.com. Or for more information on his coaching, visit rickbeldencoaching.com. If you have a story to tell and you think your experience would help others, then please get in contact either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed listening, please do rate and review the podcast. It really helps. Finally, this book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, which is based on some of the stories from the podcast, and it's available on Amazon and through other online retailers.